name is Laura Hunter.
And I'm Taylor McCann.
And this is
The Leak of the Nation's Long-Lived Secrets. We were young, we were foolish, we were arrogant, but we were right. I believe that we are in a national crisis which justifies and requires acts of unauthorized truth-telling. I am calling for such patriotic whistleblowing to take place right now.
The leak of the Pentagon Papers in 1971 is known for spreading classified information about the government when Richard M. Nixon was in office during the Vietnam War in the 60s. This was a time when Volkswagen buses, hippies, and peace signs weren't the only revolution in America, but when the peak of U.S. soldiers were in Vietnam fighting against the communists. Daniel Ellsberg, a military analyst working for the Nixon administration, was the first to notice the U.S. was lying about their success in Vietnam. And he was the man who started releasing content to the newspapers. With the risk of legal action, newspapers decided that it was important to communicate to the people and tell the truth about the government for their understanding. The leak of the confidential information would soon turn out to be the most record-breaking decade of news that would construct the future of the nation as we know it.
The big year was 1964, when I learned about what was really happening with the U.S. involvement in Vietnam and how they were keeping it from the public. I realized that their actions were not going to bring them the victory that they desperately wanted.
Daniel was right, but why skip to the end? Let's think back to before Ellsberg's time. In 1954, when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president, this is where the lies began.
President Eisenhower here. It was towards the end of my presidency that this whole mess started. Senator Kennedy and I pledged that we would help prevent the spread of communism throughout the world by starting in Vietnam. We also agreed that this information would probably not be taken very well by the general public.
I am John F. Kennedy. I was very worried that Viet Cong was starting to gain control in the South. That's when I decided that our troops must get in there. I made a speech in Washington, D.C. on June 1st, 1956, when I said, "Vietnam is our offspring. We cannot abandon it. We cannot ignore its needs." After I gave this inspiring speech, I ended up sending a small task force to Vietnam to provide aid to the South Vietnamese government. I had to send more American soldiers to prevent the spread of even more communism. But that's when my journey in this whole mess ended. 1963. When I was assassinated.
I am President Lyndon B. Johnson, and I was elected after the last President Kennedy. The war was growing rapidly, so I decided to send significant amounts of soldiers into battle. In a speech I made in 1965, I stated, "We fight because we must fight if we are to live in a world where every country can shape its own destiny." Why are we in South Vietnam? We are there because we have a promise to keep, and I intend to keep that promise. Nixon, there's something I must tell you.
What is it, Mr. President?
You will soon take my place. There's a promise that you must keep that has been kept since Eisenhower.
I must continue this secret. I made a promise that I had a secret plan to end the war in Vietnam. I spoke to the American people on January 23rd, 1973. With our secret negotiations at the sensitive stage they were in during this recent period, for me to have discussed publicly our efforts to secure peace would have seriously harmed and possibly destroyed the chances for peace. Therefore, I now know that you now understand why I have not made any public statements about those efforts. I took a huge step and began to bomb Cambodia. I thought that keeping the bombing secret would help the U.S. win faster, but this plan did not last long.
And that's where I come in. In 1965, I joined the U.S. Department of Defense, where I was stationed in South Vietnam. I slowly began to see the imperfections within the war and realized how immoral the war in Vietnam really was. I needed to talk to President Nixon. Hello, Mr. President.
What can I do for you?
The U.S. may not be doing as well as you think. More bombings and more U.S. troops is not what Vietnam needs. I suggest that you should start to withdraw our troops from Vietnam.
Okay, sir.
Mr. President, this is a very serious concern.
Mr. Ellsberg, my decisions are exactly what is going to win this war. Now, I suggest that you never say what you learned here today. It was very clear to Ellsberg he was not allowed to spread any information about Nixon's decisions. However, he knew he must do something. He must make the Pentagon Papers public.
Over several months of attempting to get the papers to Congress, no one was listening. Over time, I continued to copy more papers for myself, hoping to release them somehow, someday. After Nixon bombed Cambodia, I was desperate. The only way for the American people to take notice of the papers was if I gave them to the press, which was the biggest, most fast-spreading and significant way of communicating and understanding at the time.
Daniel Ellsberg came to us with direct evidence from the Pentagon Papers. We published 3 front-page articles in 2 days containing secret, classified information regarding the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The information was completely unknown to the public, so it was a big shock when released. After the second article was published on June 14, 1971, we received a telegram from the Attorney General of the United States that said,
"The New York Times contains information relating to the national defense of the United States and bears top secret classification. I respectfully request that you publish no further information."
We responded by saying, "The Times must respectfully decline the request of the Attorney General, believing that it is in the interest of the people of this country to be informed of the material contained in this series of articles." The newspapers believed that they had the right of the freedom of the press, so the New York Times published the third article the following day. After our third article on June 15, 1971, the government put a temporary restraining order to stop us from publishing more Pentagon Paper articles. On June 18th was when the official hearing of the case on the Pentagon Papers began. The Times had originally won the case, but the government asked and was granted an extension to restrain the Times from publishing more information until the second hearing on June 21st. However, this time it would be with the Supreme Court.
Since the Times was restrained from publishing, I gave the rest of what had not been published of the Pentagon Papers to the Washington Post. And just as expected, the Post received a warning to stop publishing the classified information. And, once again, the newspaper respectfully declined. But once the Post was restrained from publishing, other news companies began to jump in and talk about this topic as well.
Let's see how the Supreme Court chose to end this debate.
"Do you promise to speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?"
The government and the Times said,
I do.
It was June 30th, 1971, at 2:30 p.m. in a split vote, 6-3. The Supreme Court ruled,
"The publication of the Pentagon Papers is justified under the right to freedom of the press in the First Amendment." The press had won. I was charged with up to 115 years in prison for what I did to steal and distribute the papers. This charge was eventually dropped in June of '72 on the 89th day of the trial. The leak proved that there are consequences when the government doesn't communicate to the public. For example, shortly after the release of the Pentagon Papers, the Watergate scandal showed even more secrets that the government keeps. It caused a horrible relationship between Nixon administration and the media, especially with the Washington Post.
today's society has similar conflicts between the government and the ideas of freedom of the press. Specifically, former President Trump has been known to have an unfortunate relationship with the news. There are also situations in today's society where the government has hidden information from the public. With the most current example of the coronavirus, many people have experienced direct censorship. Some sources claim that the government is just simply keeping secrets and not stating the specifics that the people are asking for.
The idea of freedom of the press has also presented itself in today's society. There is still no answer on how to distinguish between what should and shouldn't be spoken to the American public. But the topic of the Pentagon Papers has given newspapers all around the country the encouragement to use their voice and communicate when speaking out about government or politics. The way for communication played a large role in how we communicate through the news today.
In conclusion, the leak of the Pentagon Papers was a significant event in the history of the U.S., and it has affected the way news sources and government relay information to the American public today.
But I was not wrong to hope that exposing secrets 5 presidents had withheld and the lies they would have told might have benefits for the democracy and were worthy of all the risks. Wouldn't you go to jail to help end the war? Thank you.